HPC-WDR for short. Our mission started in 2022 as part of the Exascale Computing Project's Broadening Participation Initiative. And from that point on and going forward, that mission is to promote a positive and inclusive workforce culture for advanced computing in the Department of Energy National Laboratories. This year, we are generously supported by the Department of Energy's software stewardship organizations, but our mission is to reach out to all collaborators and DOE National Lab staff that work in computing. I've posted the HPC-WDR website in the chat. If anyone wants to learn more or wants to join our community meetings, you can find links to do that on that website. I'm also going to post one more time the webinar pre-survey form. And a reminder that we have closed captions available in the chat. So if you have not taken a chance to fill out that pre-survey, please do. It helps us understand how much you're learning from our webinars and helps us plan for the future. And spoiler alert, all of you that registered will get a reminder for a post survey, which completes that process. All right, today we are super fortunate to host Dr. Denice Ward Hood. She is the director for the Center for Culturally Responsive Evaluation and Assessment at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. She's also a teaching professor there in the Department of Education, Policy, Organization, and Leadership in the College of Education. She has over 30 years of experience in program evaluation, learning outcomes assessment, and social science research with a particular focus in higher education. Today, she's going to guide us in a discussion about high-performance computing, culture, and identity. Dr. Denice Ward Hood, thank you so much for facilitating this discussion. Lois and I will moderate, so go ahead and take it away.
Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon. I am very happy to be here. My professional positionality, though, is as a social scientist. Educational psychology, and I have a lens that is, my perspective is filtered through education. So HPC is not my discipline. However, I have seen some really great opportunities for synergies with our various disciplines. So I'm excited to be here. I also extend thanks to Suzanne and Marianne, Lois and Valerie for inviting me and for the support of the Interlabs HPC workforce group. I also want to mention that before we began, Suzanne and I were talking about how best to manage questions and comments that appear in the chat throughout the webinar. And I think what we've agreed to do, because responding to them as we're going is probably not going to work too well. So they're going to share those with me after the webinar. I'll be able to review them, and then I will respond with comments or feedback as best I can. I'll send that to Suzanne, and then she can share it out with the group. All right, so to begin, I'd like you to think about your various identities. List as many as you can think of. So for example, here are a few of mine. I identify as a Black American, hetero, average size, cisgender woman. I'm a baby boomer, a Catholic Christian, and a native English speaker. I identify as socioeconomically middle class, and I'm a Midwesterner. I'm right-handed, and I hold a doctoral degree. Have an idea about what identities that you're thinking of, and remember that some of them may be visible to others, and some of them may be invisible. There's also some that are more salient depending on the context and the time and place. So once you've got those jotted down or listed somewhere, just hold on to them, and we'll circle back to those in a little bit. Let's move on to discuss some key terms. To begin, let's talk about this term diversity. So what is it? Simply put, diversity in this context refers to people and their myriad identities and lived experiences. So keep in mind that diversity is not a euphemism. It's not a euphemism for anyone who is not white, not too old or too young, not male or cisgender or heterosexual, or without a physical disability. It's not for some way, it's not a euphemism for someone who's not middle class, Christian, native English speaking. And it does not equal people of color or women. So diversity is not just the visible and invisible identities and experiences that we all have, but how those experiences have shaped your life and informed what you know and how you came to know it. So in that case, who is diverse? Since diversity is such a broad concept, I encourage you to be specific in identifying what aspect of diversity you are referring to. And keep in mind that diversity is necessary for equity, but it's not sufficient for equity on its own. So let's talk a little bit about equity. Equity means that people have access to what they need in order to have an opportunity to be successful. And these terms get used interchangeably quite a bit, so let's unpack these a bit. Equity is not the same thing as equality. So equality is when everyone receives the same thing, same treatment, resources, and opportunities, regardless of their identity or status. So who could have an issue with that, right? It seems fair, but then it gets complicated and nuanced. Equity is defined as the absence of avoidable or remediable barriers, and equity is connected with justice. Justice addresses those systemic and structural barriers that eventually will facilitate equity. So I encourage you to think about equity and justice beyond just the person-to-person interactions, and think about the ways that inequality is baked into our policies, structures, and procedures. And sometimes this is really invisible, but they have long-term, long-lasting consequences, and sometimes they long pre-existed before we even came to an organization, so we might not even be aware of that they're there. So the next term is culture. So culture is a set of values, traditions, and practices generally shared among a group. And they may be tightly linked to your personal identity. Culture is essentially how we do things around here. It's a shared worldview. HPC is made up of several cultures, like mathematics and engineering and so forth. So you probably belong to multiple cultural groups simultaneously. Outside of your work, maybe your religious affiliation or your pickleball group, that would be considered a culture. I identify with research university faculty culture, and also more recently with AARP culture because of senior discounts. Who doesn't love those? How has computing culture been stereotypically portrayed, particularly in the media, as men, white and Asian, somewhat nerdy, smart, and socially awkward? Think about how these stereotypes persist and the ways that they manifest in our work, in our career, in our aspirations. So within HPC culture, there are a lot of other cultures, like systems engineers or computer scientists, people that work with AI and so forth. This can be an asset, presenting really great opportunities, but also it can present some challenges under this big HPC umbrella. Like, who is HPC? With so many disciplines and skill sets included within HPC, who decides what an HPC career is? Does that matter? And to whom does it matter? For example, who decides if you're authentic? Is there a secret handshake or a jacket when you're in the club? This can set up feeling like an imposter in your field. And these feelings can be magnified if you are one of one or one of a few. In this blog post, Ian Bogos said, increase the diversity of representation among people who make these computer systems, and they will serve the population better. By representation, I interpret this not just as different crayons in a box for the sake of having different crayons, but because of the ways of knowing and knowledge afforded by these various lived experiences, these are significant in determining what problems are worthy of study and funding, and what is acceptable evidence, and at what threshold success is measured. I asked to consider and critique this graph. If you would agree with all the steps in the cycle, or even some of the steps in this cycle, what would you change? And why would you decide to change this? You may agree with the goal, but we have different ideas about the objectives to reach the goal. Anyway, think about this. We will come back to it in a little bit. I want to pause here for a moment to see if anyone wants to open their mic and pose a question, or if there's something in the chat that we can take a few minutes to attend to now.
You're all capable of unmuting yourselves by hitting the unmute button or by holding your space bar down.
I don't see anything yet, so we will press on. I want to think a little bit about these different aspects of identities and culture, and how we tend to think of all of these things as existing among other people. Like other people have culture, but I don't. Or other people's identities are significant to them, but I don't actually have any of those. But in reality, they're important to all of us. And I think if we think about that, it demystifies, and I think it kind of breaks down some of that sense of stigma around thinking about, who we are and how did we get here. As we said, everybody's interested in fairness. Everyone's interested in having what they need in order to be successful. It's just, how do we do that? That's the places where it gets a little spicy. That's where people sometimes disagree on how do we manage that. And because these things have also become highly politicized, it adds to some of the confusion and misunderstanding around how can we best do that. So what I'd like to do is we're going to have a little time for discussion. I've got some questions that I want you to consider, and I'll put those up on the next slide. Some of these questions were posed by you pre-webinar. We'll be using, I see a question. How does culture influence what we view as talent? Oh, excellent question. All right, that is definitely something to think about when we get into the breakout rooms. So we'll be using these rooms for maybe 15 or 20 minutes. It just depends on how we go. And if small group discussion is your jam, then you're in luck. But if it's not, I encourage you not to log off. Hold off hitting that leave meeting button just yet. There'll be enough people in a group so that you can just listen if you don't want to say anything or you don't want to put anything in the chat. Then we'll come back together in a after time, and then we'll spend the remaining time together sort of talking about these issues, and also wrapping up before we close out the webinar. So I'll show you the questions. So you can use these, or you can create other topics that interest you.